This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage.
Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here, back with another edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. It is finally game week. Ohio State season is kicking off. The 2021 campaign will begin on Thursday evening as Ohio State travels to the Twin Cities to take on Minnesota. And to break down the preview, we bring in 24/7 Sports' Ryan Burns, publisher of the Minnesota 24/7 site, GopherIllustrated. Ryan, appreciate you joining us tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited to talk about actual live football coming up this week and not some theoretical nonsense.
Yeah, for sure. And it's an interesting matchup. Both Ohio State and Minnesota, are not used to opening the season typically with a conference game. And this one's a big one, though. It's Thursday night. Most of the country, I imagine, will be watching as there are other options. Let's just say they're, hopefully for the Big Ten's sake, Rutgers will be up pretty significantly on tempo at that point. And there's not a ton of competition. And this game will be on Fox. You got Gus Johnson, Joel Klatt, great crew doing the game. So it should be an exciting one for not just Ohio State and Minnesota fans, but for all fans who get to watch these two teams. Let's talk, though, about the Gophers. Before we go into the nitty gritty, I want your opinion, your expertise. I mean, obviously 2019 was a great year for this program, and people thought maybe it was the start of PJ Fleck's surge to the top of the Big Ten West. But last year didn't go so great. A little bit of a disappointing 3-4 2020 campaign for the Gophers. They obviously have lost their best player overall in Rashad Bateman, who opted out, opted in, opted out again, but was a first-round pick this year. Very talented player. They do bring back a lot of talent, but I guess first, before we jump into who that talent is, let's talk about kind of what happened where they had such a good year in 2019, not such a great year in 2020, and then what are the general expectations for this program entering 2021?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a heck of a couple of years here for PJ Fleck. I mean, you go back to that 2019 season where they start, I think 9-0 was the mark. It was 9-0 with going 9-0 over Penn State at home, which was a gigantic game for Minnesota, because I think Penn State was 7-1, a ranked opponent. They're able to beat them, and they're able to get Wisconsin at home to end that year. All they had to do was beat Wisconsin at home, and you get to play Ohio State in Indianapolis. They show up for the first 10, 15 minutes, and then they forgot how to play football, and Wisconsin takes it to them. So they end up playing Auburn in the Outback Bowl, and they end up actually beating them pretty handily. I mean, there wasn't, I did a lot of Auburn radio that week, and Auburn media didn't think they had a chance. I didn't think they were going to win the game. I thought they'd certainly be in it because there's certainly an MO of PJ Fleck in bowl season. His teams performed pretty well. But, yeah, you talk about last year. I mean, there was a lot of change. Just a lot of change for Minnesota. They lost a lot of guys on defense from that 2019 team, including, I think, 3-4 NFL draft picks, which certainly for Minnesota standards is quite a bit. And then when you look at that defense last year and how horrid it was at times, I think from talking with the Minnesota coaches so frequently about it over the last year, they point to the lack of time they got. They didn't get a spring ball to install 7-8 new starters. They didn't get a summer to go over it with them. They really got 3 weeks of an abbreviated fall camp, and here's Michigan. And then Michigan just tears them to shreds. Now, the defense got better as the year went on, but they certainly weren't what they were in 2019. And then offensively for Minnesota last year, I think you got to start with the quarterback. I mean, Tanner Morgan goes from throwing 30 touchdown passes to 2 NFL guys, and Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman in 2019. So at the end of the year, Tyler Johnson's out winning a Super Bowl with Tom Brady when Rashad Bateman had opted back out. And there was a steep drop-off from 2 bona fide NFL guys to what Minnesota had ready for them that week because of COVID and opt-outs and different things like that. Because Minnesota's wide receiver room definitely is not Ohio State's, where there's just NFL talent oozing everywhere. So I think it's a culmination of things. And then you kind of look at the schedule at the end of the year there, they're 3-4. And I look at that schedule and I think to myself, well, they should have been 4-3. They blew a 3-score lead on the road against Maryland in the fourth quarter. They're up 17 points to start the fourth quarter, and they lose in overtime, which is just incredibly bad. And then they had every opportunity to beat Wisconsin in the final game of the year, and they lose that one in overtime as well. And 4-3, I think people think about it a little bit differently. 5-2, I think they think about it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, your record's your record, no matter if it was good or whether it was bad. So I think expectations for this 2021 team are certainly more towards what they were in 2019 than what they were in 2020. Because yes, they do lose Rashad Bateman, probably the best receiver to come through here. But in that same respect, they do return 20 starters.
Yeah, and I think you might have. I didn't hear you mention it. Maybe I apologize if you did, but they had a new offense coordinator last year too, and so that was a big. It didn't work out for Penn State so much, but that was a big. That's a lot of changes to go through, and reminds me a lot of, obviously Ohio State, more talented team overall, but a lot of what the Ohio State defense went through last year. And as you mentioned, a young, inexperienced team, new coordinator, not having the opportunity to develop those guys in the spring and then properly in fall camp. And I think you saw the result there. And that's why I think Ohio State's coaches are a little bit more optimistic about what this year's defense will bring. Maybe it won't be 2019 level, but it will certainly be closer to that than what they saw in 2020. At least they're hoping. I guess, saying the expectations are a little bit more 2019 versus 2020. When you talk about the fan base heading into this opener against Ohio State, I mean, you can't really ask for a better situation to play Ohio State. You get them in a night game, season opener. Everyone's going to be super pumped up. It's not like your team's, 2-6 at this point and the fan base has kind of mailed it in, right? Like everyone's optimistic. You get Ohio State at home, a new quarterback, an inexperienced back seven, a few new, two new starters on the offensive line, a couple of the other guys shuffled around positions, things of that nature. I mean, if there is a time to catch Ohio State, it's probably now. So is that the expectation of the fan base that they could beat Ohio State? Is it that they're just gonna, that this is gonna be a close, tight game? Are they expecting to kind of get rolled in this one? Like, what is, the spread's only, I think I checked earlier today, was 14. It's been hovering around anywhere from 13.5 to like 14.5, depending on what book you look. So that's pretty low for OSU for an opener. They're obviously used to playing, and the Akrons and MAC teams and things like that of the world. So what is the expectations, I guess, with that said, of the Minnesota fan base entering this game?
I think they're a little bit more optimistic than I am. Now, again, you've mentioned all the reasons why they're optimistic. It's a brand new quarterback. It's a brand new linebacking core. It's a secondary that struggled against the pass last year. And it's an interesting time because, the thing I keep coming back to is Ohio State's run offense versus Minnesota's run defense. Minnesota's run defense last year, porous. I mean, horrible. When you pick the adjective, I'll probably agree with it. There's a reason they were dead last in the Big Ten in terms of yards per carry allowed. And I look at Ohio State's run offense, and they were number one in total rushing yards, number one in yards per carry last year. So, yeah, I don't know what to expect from CJ Stroud. He's never thrown a collegiate pass. I know he's a five-star kid because Ohio State doesn't have to recruit. They just get to select, which is the benefit of being Ohio State. But is Minnesota going to be able to stop the run enough? And I think enough is the key word there, that CJ Stroud has to throw the ball. Because I also know that wide receiving core, I don't know if you've heard PJ Fleck this week. I mean, he's called, Ohio State's wide receiving core the best in the country, whether it's Olave, whether it's Wilson, or whether it's somehow today I learned Marvin Harrison Jr. is there. So I feel incredibly old. And it's a little bit different now. I mean, they're so gifted back there, where Minnesota, without Benjamin St-Juste, who they lost to the NFL, who's the third-round draft pick of the Washington football team, that other corner spot has been a big question mark. It looks like they're going to be going with a fourth-year guy, and Terrell Smith, who I think has the speed to keep up with whatever Ohio State's got out there. He ran a 10.5 in high school. He's very big, long, but he's been way too inconsistent, which is why he hasn't played as much. So I think the fan base expects for this game to be at least close. And so do I. But I think we're going to learn a lot about both teams here, probably in the first 30 minutes. I mean, with how this thing goes. Can Minnesota stop the run? Because if they can't, this thing's going to get ugly early. And last year, they really couldn't. Now, they have an experienced defensive line. They brought in a couple of transfers in their front seven. The headliners would be Jack Gibbons from Abilene Christian, a linebacker they're very high on, Niles Pinckney, a defensive tackle transfer from Clemson. played over 1,200 snaps for them the last 4 years. So it's not like he was just a depth guy. And they feel a lot better about their front seven. Well, that's great, but then you got to go and do it against arguably the best team in the Big Ten, who I think is the best team in the Big Ten, in the Buckeyes. So you get them at home, you get them. It's going to be a ruckus crowd. I mean, there's a lot of people who are excited to finally be back in the stadium. So if Minnesota can find some momentum early, I think it'll be interesting. But if Ohio State can just go 6 plays, 75 yards, at the end of the first quarter, we're talking about 14-3. I think you're going to see the balloon start to go out in terms of enthusiasm in Huntington Bank Stadium.
Yeah, it should really be interesting to see. I'm very curious because, we'll talk about scheme in a minute, but if I'm Minnesota, I'm loading the box and forcing CJ Stroud to beat you with his arm. And if he does that, you tip your cap to him. And if you're Ohio State, you're looking at last year's film and you're saying, okay, let's get Master Teague, let's get Mayan Williams, let's get 5-star Travion Henderson going. And they have a really good offensive line. And, if you don't have to throw the ball, you don't kind of like Michigan did last year in that opener. So it will be interesting to see. Let's talk scheme though. And let's start with the Gophers offense. Kind of what, last year 2 years ago, they were, as you mentioned, I mean, they had 2 NFL receivers and they were all about the air attack, 30 touchdowns against just 7 interceptions for Tanner Morgan. But last year they were leaned very heavily on Muhammad Ibrahim and the power run game. What should we expect to see from from scheme wise from the Gophers offense? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that unit and who are the key players to watch?
But it'll be interesting. In 2019, they were a base 11 personnel team. So we're talking 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. But coming into this game, Minnesota's number 1 wide receiver, Chris Ottman-Bell, is banged up. And we really don't even know if he's going to play or not. Flex said he was week to week and now he's day to day. And then we learned last week he was running. We don't know what the injury is specifically, something on the leg, maybe it's an ankle. But if he can't play, I mean, this completely changes the dynamic of what Minnesota has because they have a lot of inexperienced wide receivers. Now, I think they have some talented guys, certainly, that are going to be really good down the line. But I think this year you're going to see a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of 2 tight ends. And it's going to be, is this the year in year 5 of the Fleck tenure that they actually involve the running backs and the tight ends in the passing game? Because I think they're going to have to do that against Ohio State just out of necessity. Because if that's the way if I'm going to attack this Ohio State defense, I want to attack those inexperienced linebackers. You lose your top 4 linebackers from last year, 3 all-conference guys. And yeah, they're obviously very talented, but they're very inexperienced. So you're going to see a lot of zone, inside zone, outside zone. Inside zone is Minnesota's bread and butter play. It is the play you're going to see more times than any other thing from this Minnesota offense. And if I was the Ohio State defensive coordinator or any defensive coordinator this year, to your point, I would put 7-8 in the box, and I would say, Tanner Morgan, prove it. Mike Sanford, now in year 2, you know what your personnel is, prove it. I mean, and that's what I would do all season long because Ibrahim is an incredibly gifted running back in this scheme. Absolutely. I think he's one of the best zone running backs in the country. He knows how to get lost behind this offensive line, and he refuses to go down at first contact. That's why he is, I think, over 500 collegiate carries, and he's averaging over 5 yards a carry. I mean, it's not a fluke. Mo Ibrahim is really good, but I also know this Ohio State defensive line is probably the strength of their defense. Now, Minnesota's got an offensive line that I think is going to be pretty talented, but I've seen the games against these physical defensive lines, and it hasn't gone Minnesota's way. So if you told me Minnesota's offensive line can actually at least stand their ground and not get pummeled back, I think that's going to be an interesting predicament. But I need to see Minnesota use their running backs and tight ends in the passing game because they have some guys that I think can help there.
Yeah, and flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, kind of same thing. What can Ohio State's offense expect to see from the Gophers from a scheme standpoint? Where are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of that unit? And who are some of those key players?
Yeah, Minnesota's a base 4-2-5 defense, or at least they have been historically. I think you're probably going to see them maybe go some 4-3. We even maybe some 4-4 at times, depending on what defensive coordinator Joe Rossi wants to throw at them. Now, I'll tell you, Rossi, he's an East Coast guy, and he doesn't like to mix words much, and he feels much better about this defense this year. And I get it. And it starts with their defensive line that I think is improved. They're probably top player on defense is Boye Mafe, someone who led the team in sacks and tackles for loss last year. I made the prediction this past week on Gopher Illustrated. I think he gets to double-digit sacks, which would be the first time in, I think, 12, 13 years that's happened. I think he's going to be a top 100 draft pick in the next NFL draft. He is 6'4", incredibly explosive, incredibly long. He looks like what Ohio State just gets every single year, and he is a very gifted guy. And they also have Asezio Tamiwu, who is in his third, fourth year as a starter. And then they brought in transfers at the defensive tackle position. Minnesota is finally old and experienced on their defensive line. Now, does that mean anything this year? Does it mean anything against Ohio State? I'm not sure. I think from what I saw in practice, they looked improved. They looked physical. They're going to rotate a lot of bodies there. But Ohio State speed is a different animal. Ohio State physicality at times can be a different animal. So I think the question mark becomes, are the linebackers much better? Because they were bad last year. They couldn't shed blocks. They had issues diagnosing things in front of them. It's a large part of the reason Michigan hung 49 on them at home was the linebackers. I mean, they just got eviscerated with motion and misdirection. They'd lean one way, the play would come back the other way, and they just were never in their gaps. Now, Jack Gibbons, the transfer they took from Abilene Christian, is going to help with that, but they just need to be more disciplined. And they were towards the end of the year. That's how you saw them hold Nebraska and Wisconsin to 17 and 20 points. Now, Nebraska's offense and Wisconsin's offense, a little bit different than what we're going to see on Thursday for Ohio State. So, it's can you keep the the Buckeye offense off balance enough just to make sure your offense can stay in the game, because better than anyone, from someone who covers Ohio State, they can put points on you in a hurry, and this thing can get blown open very, very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And before we jump into the keys for the game and score predictions, what's the injury report looking like? You mentioned Amin Bell kind of being day-to-day, very big question mark there. And if he plays, I can't imagine he's at 100% full speed. But I could see him giving it a go, obviously. Who else, any other key players from Minnesota, potentially this game in jeopardy or kind of healthy otherwise?
Well, I wish I knew the actual injury report. We don't even get a depth chart here in Minnesota.
Same down here in Columbus, yeah.
So it's tough to say, again, from the practice we last saw, which was 2 weeks ago, Minnesota was very healthy. It was Ottman Bell was essentially it. Every other key contributor, as far as we saw, was healthy and performing well. And I guess the best news we heard today was the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator spoke, and that's where Mike Sanford, the OC, talked about how Ibrahim is the healthiest he's ever been in the 18 months he's been here. Now, is that true? Is it coach speak? I'm going to let you and your listeners decide. I don't know, but it is, considering some of the other people across the country and across the Big Ten who are already dealing with injuries, I think Minnesota's in a pretty fortunate spot right now.
Yeah, it looks like Ohio State is too. They had a couple linebacker, offensive linemen in jeopardy, but it looks like they've both been back and practicing. So it's good that both these teams, I think, will be at full strength and we'll get to see them at their best or as best as you can be in week one of the season. Now, for Minnesota, give me your keys to the game if they want to upset Ohio State and pull this thing off.
Well, if you're Minnesota's offense, I think I just talked about it with what Michigan did to Minnesota, but I mean, you had inexperienced linebackers. I think according to Pro Football Focus last year, none of the projected starting linebackers played more than 100 snaps defensively. So yeah, they're talented. We all know that. But they're inexperienced. And like you said, it's a Thursday night, national television. They're amped up. It's on the road. So if I was the offensive coordinator, I'd be throwing as much misdirection and motion at them as I possibly can. Get them out of their gaps, get them, where they shouldn't be, and try to get chunk plays. Because if you get them with a couple plays early, I think that changes a lot of things for both teams. The linebackers are going to be thinking. If they're thinking, they're a step slow, and then you can exploit some things. But if Minnesota just decides, we're going to try to maul you up front, and they've tried to do that at times, but it's just two tight ends, inside zone, 3 yards, and some dust. I mean, that's just not the way that you're going to do it against Ohio State. And then I think the other key thing for Minnesota's offense is I think they're going to have to try to play keep away at times, because Ohio State can't score if their offense isn't on the field. So if you have some 12-play, 8-minute drives, you cannot stall in the red zone because you know better than I do. Field goals don't beat Ohio State. That's not how it goes. Like, you know what beats Ohio State? Touchdowns. So you have to have these long drives at times to keep that offense off the field. And then you have to make sure that when you get into the red zone or the green zone, that you score touchdowns instead of field goals. And then for the defense, I mean, you got to try to hold them to, I don't know what's realistic, 28, 31 points if all things break well for the defense, because, I mean, you can't really stop. I don't think Minnesota's defense can really stop Ohio State unless, I mean, the only way it happens is if CJ Stroud implodes. If he has 3 turnovers, he's got a couple of picks and a fumble, or Ohio State just in general can't hang on to the ball. I mean, Minnesota's got to win the turnover battle, and they have to figure out a way to stop the run enough. And again, enough is the key word. If they can hold Ohio State's only 180 or 200 rushing yards instead of, I think they averaged something crazy like 250 last year, which is insane to me. But if you can hold them enough to put yourself in passing downs, your 3rd and 5s, your 2nd and longs, and make Stroud beat you, I mean, that's what you want. If CJ Stroud, the 5-star kid, goes out and beats you, I mean, what else are you going to do? I mean, that's the way you'd want to get beat in this game. You don't want to get beat with Master Teague and whatever else is in that running back room, just 350 yards down your throat. That's fun for no one except Ohio State. So stop the run enough defensively, force some turnovers defensively. And if CJ Stroud beats you, hats off to the kid in his first career start.
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything you said. Now, if you're Ohio State, what are the keys to the game to beat Minnesota? I have a feeling based on some of the things you said, what you're going to say, but how do you beat Minnesota if you're Ohio State coming into this one?
Well, if you're the Ohio State defense, I would load the box. And like I said, I'd make Tanner Morgan prove that he's improved. I make these wide receivers prove they can create separation. I'd make these tight ends prove they can get behind the linebackers. And I'd make this offensive line prove that, some people have given them some lofty expectations. I think on paper, this offensive line is probably the most gifted and talented and experienced offensive line for Minnesota standards in my 11 years now covering the team. They have something crazy like 180 career starts between the entire room. They get back Daniel Fa'alele, the Australian monstrosity at 6'8", 370. They get back Curtis Dunlap, another starter who was a 4-star kid. But can you go out and do it? Because if you can't, Ohio State's front 7 is just going to eat you alive, and this thing's going to be 28-3 at half, and I know how that game goes. So if you're Ohio State, I'd load the box, say Mo Ibrahim's not going to beat me. Tanner Morgan, same thing. If you beat me, so be it, but Mo's not going to. And then if you're if you're Ohio State's offense, you're just going to pound the ball. I mean, you have a brand new quarterback, never thrown a pass. You're on the road, crazy environment, national television. I mean, you name it. I mean, you should just come out with a very run-heavy game plan, mix in some play action, get some easy throws for him, get him moving out of the pocket, and hope that you can run for 300 yards. Now, is that the craziest thing in the world to me? No, I watched a run defense last year that sucked. So I've seen it before. I've seen it recently, but I'd be surprised if they have that much success. But that's the way I would attack this Minnesota defense, is run the ball early, go play action, and make Minnesota's corners prove that they can cover Olave, Wilson, and whatever else is in that room.
Yeah, I again agree for the most part. It could come down to, as you said, the run defenses versus the run offenses, and as it usually does in football, right? And so, if Ohio State's able to do what they want on the ground, it's going to make CJ Stroud doing what he wants in the air that much easier, and vice versa, right? I mean, if Ibrahim is running the ball successfully, you're keeping Ohio State's offense off the field, and then B, they're going to be, those linebackers, especially maybe the secondary, is going to be cheating, and that opportunity gives Tanner Morgan a great chance to run some RPO, run some play action, and maybe get some big hitters off of that. To your point about Fa'alele, I think he's listed at 6'9", 380. Ohio State starting right tackle is going to be DeJuan Jones, who's 6'8", 360. So it should be fun seeing what I think will be 2 of the bigger offensive lines in the country, go at it. So that should be pretty fun, I think, to see those 2 gigantic human beings play tackle for their respective teams. Two more things before we let you go. The easy one, I guess, first is how is the game going to play out, and what is your score prediction?
I see it only two ways. I mean, either this game is close at half, and it's going to be an interesting second half if that's the case, because you keep the crowd in it, and you keep Minnesota believing that they can do it here at home, or it's going to be 2-3 scores, and it's a here we go again. It's a it's Michigan 2020 season opener here once again. So, I mean, if you're Minnesota, I do think they'll find some success early as Ohio State's linebackers and back seven get acclimated to what Minnesota's going to do. I would think it's probably going to be something like 17-13 or 21-13 Ohio State at halftime, and then we'll see how close Minnesota can keep it in the second half. But again, I just think it comes down to how do you think both teams come out? And I don't know how to answer that. I think Minnesota will be amped. They're at home. I think they're a good football team. But Ohio State's obviously a national playoff contender for a reason. Now, the biggest wild card in all of this that makes it difficult is, what does CJ Stroud look like? And I don't know that anybody knows. I mean, they know he's got the talent. They know he's the 5-star. They know he got in some games last year to hand off the ball, and he had that long touchdown run. But can he throw in this environment? Because when he completes his first 5 to 10 passes, the crowd's certainly going to be in it. And if he struggles, that means it's only going to continue as the game goes on. But I think at the end of the day, I think the most likely scenario, Ohio State wins this game something like 38-24. In that instance, I think I'm slightly on the under. I keep it at 14. I wouldn't surprise me if it's like 42-24, 42-28, something like that. So I do think Minnesota is going to find some success. But if Minnesota does find a way to win, it's 31-28, 31-27, 34-31. I can't see a way Minnesota outscores them in the 40s. Like, if this thing gets into a shootout, that ain't great for Minnesota. But if they can keep this thing manageable, and like I said, the 31-28, 34-31, it's going to be an interesting game.
Yeah, I'm still toying with my score, but I agree with you. I think if Minnesota's going to win, it's got to be a street fight. I think they got to keep Ohio State around 24-ish, definitely under 30. And they got to run the clock and, play keep away and not turn the ball over and hope Ohio State coughs it up a few times, things like that. But I am leaning toward Ohio State pulling out a win. I think it's going to be close for about, really close for about a quarter and a half. I think Ohio State will start to pull away, kind of as you said, maybe be up something like 21-13-ish at half. And then I think those first couple possessions in the second half are really going to be the difference in the game. Can Minnesota punch back, or can Ohio State knock them out? And I think that's really what I'm deciding is how close it's going to be entering the fourth quarter before I give a prediction. So be sure to look out for that on BuckeyeScoop.com. I'll have that later this week. We'll have it Thursday before the game. Now, Ryan, I don't expect Ohio State usually travels pretty well, but I think with everything going on, I mean, they gave back some of their allotment of tickets, which is very unusual for Ohio State, especially a Thursday night of a holiday weekend in a cool city. No disrespect to some of the other Big Ten cities, but I think people, especially in September, would make the trip to Minneapolis. But for those who are visiting, tips, advice for best places to eat, tailgating, bars to go to. If you were visiting as a fan, what were the things you'd have to hit up while you're in town?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Now, we'll see about the weather. I know we talked about it kind of in the pre-production meeting here. But it might be a little overcast, maybe some light rain. We'll see. Again, we'll see. But it's going to be a beautiful day. I mean, it's going to be something like 75 degrees. You can't ask for a much better temperature. It's been so insanely hot out here in Minnesota. And I know everybody thinks it's a tundra, but I think we've had something crazy like 30 days over 90. I mean, I'm sweltering as a Minnesota guy. But for bars around here, just different places around the stadium that you want to stay so you can get have a couple 1, 2, 3, 4 beverages in you and then walk over to the stadium. One would be Stub and Herbs. It's just a couple blocks from the stadium. It's a great college bar. They've got a patio, they've got a garden, they've got everything there. And I know the guys there, they're very good guys. You'll get reasonable drink prices too. Sally's is another one, just across the street down there from Stub and Herbs. They just refurbished it. It looks awesome in there. It's a really big space. just a couple blocks from the stadium as well. If you want a chain, literally across the street, there's a Buffalo Wild Wings. So if you want to go over there and get different things like that. But I'd also just say, Minnesota fans, and just Minnesota people, we could call it Minnesota nice for a reason. So if you just want to walk around any of the tailgating lots right around the stadium and you want to go talk to anybody, I can assure you everybody's still in a good mood because everybody's 0-0, has the lofty expectations in their mind that this could be the year for them. And so, any of the tailgating lots around there, but I think for places around the stadium to go drink and eat before the game, I'd definitely hit up Stub and Herbs and then Sally's.
Awesome advice, Ryan. Really appreciate you joining the show. Great insight on the Gophers. Definitely say hi to our guys when you see them out there on Thursday night. I'm hoping for a great game for both teams. Just excited that football's back. For those of you on Twitter, go give him a follow at Ryan Burns MN. That's at Ryan Burns MN. Thanks again, Ryan. Best of luck to you and the Gophers this season.
Yeah, I appreciate having me on.
This episode of Around the Oval was brought to you by Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage. If you've been thinking about refinancing or buying a house, check out our sponsor, Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage. They offer low rates for refinancing and home purchase loans, including first-time home buyer programs, down payment assistance, and cash-out home equity loans. Check out revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington.